This is all. Oh. Right by. Right enough. I would be kind of, yeah.
Ready to go, guys? Okay, we're going to start. So before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that the meeting is taking place on traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. So tonight's meeting, public meeting, consultation is to hear comments, questions, or concerns on the following applications. 257, 267, 257, 269 Mount Edward Road. The presenter will be Laurel Palmer Thompson, and the presenter and owner, who I believe is here, Ryan Pino of RYCH Investments, Inc. And the second application is for 480 or 82 Queen Street. Our planner, Laurel Palmer Thompson, will be presenting that. And I believe we have Ken Martin and Paul Brown here to speak to that application. Before I start, I just want to introduce our council. So to my left, to your right, is Councillor John McAleer, Councillor Mitchell Tweel, Councillor Justin Matart, Councillor Julie McCabe, Deputy Mayor Lanny Yankoff. To my right, to your left, is Councillor Duran, Councillor McAleer, Councillor Ramsey, Kevin Ramsey, Councillor McKinnon, Trevor McKinnon. Next to me, to your left, is Councillor Norman Beck. Councillor Terry Bernard could not make it because he is now a new grandfather, so he had to step aside from this meeting. So, as you know, we're back into in-person meetings at this time. Residents will still have the option to participate by video conference. Do we have some coming in, Ellen? No. Okay. And this meeting will be live streamed on YouTube. All you do is go to YouTube, City of Charlottetown, and a recording of this meeting can be accessed after the meeting. The video link is very easy, www.charlottetown.ca/video, or as I said, go to YouTube. And I just want to introduce a new board member on the planning board. Jackie Skaman is just a recent graduate from Dalhousie Planning. She's got her master's in planning, I believe, urban planning. So she's now a member of her planning board, and also she's sitting on the design review board. I think that is the only member I can see from our planning board. So I'm going to call on Deputy Mayor Lanny Yankoff, who is the chair of the Standing Committee for Planning, Development, and Heritage, to go over the order of events. Deputy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and welcome, folks. Nice to see you all out tonight on a July evening. Hope you brought your umbrellas. So just to go over some of the housekeeping rules for this evening, there'll be a brief presentation by staff and along with the applicant. After the presentation, you will all be given an opportunity to speak. Each participant will be provided 5 minutes in which to provide your comments or to ask questions to either the city staff or the applicant that's here. We always start first with the members of the public that are in the room. We'll proceed with those folks that have dialed in, but Ellen tells us that we don't have anybody on webcam tonight, WebEx tonight. So, if we do have time, you folks will have an opportunity to maybe get up to that mic a second time, providing that we see how the time is going. Council members are allowed to ask questions of clarity, but just being very mindful that our opinions on the projects need to remain neutral until the process is complete. While a member of the public is speaking, of course, we just ask everyone to be respectful of each other. We're all going to have differences and variances of opinions, but just allow those folks to be able to ask their questions, say their piece, because you'll have your turn as well to do that. I also ask you, if you have your cell phones, if you could just mute them. And if you do need to take a call, just step out of the room if you don't mind. That would be great. When you do get up to speak, if you could just identify that you're a resident of Charlottetown. You don't need to provide your address or anything like that. It's just more for public record. And the only other thing is anyone that wants to provide additional written submissions, they need to be received by noon tomorrow. And that's all I have. So enjoy the evening, and I'll turn it back over to His Worship.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Yankoff. So the order of business, we'll start off with call to order. Any declarations of conflict of interest for any of the members of council? Seeing none. The agenda, I need approval of the agenda, so moved by Councillor McKinnon, second by Councillor Matard. All those in favor? Okay. So first person I will call is Laurel Palmer Thompson for the first presentation, and we'll follow from there.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council, ladies and gentlemen of the public. This is an application to proceed to public consultation phase for approval of a development concept plan, a rezoning, official plan amendment, and approval of a lot consolidation to rezone a portion of PID numbers 390, 757, 269 Mount Edward Road, 390, 708, 265 Mount Edward Road, 390, 682, 681, or 261 Mount Edward Road, 390, 674, 257 Mount Edward Road, and 390, 690 from R2S Low Density Residential Single to CDA Comprehensive Development Area. And you can see the area bound right here in dark. The request is to develop land for multi-unit residential development under Section 44, Comprehensive Development Area Zone of the Zoning and Development Bylaw. Section 44 of the Zoning and Development Bylaw requires that amendments to a development concept plan be approved by council. The amendment approval process must be treated as if it were an amendment to the Zoning and Development Bylaw, and therefore requires notification of property owners within 100 meters of the subject property. Posting of the proposed bylaw amendment and a public meeting is required. The bylaw also requires that the working site plan and buildings also be approved on the recommendation of Planning Board. The developer is submitting a site plan along with 3D concept drawings, which they will present when the developer's consultant comes up. So the development, context of the development, go back. The property in question, it's approximately 10.97 acres, the whole area bounded. It's bounded to the north by CDA zone land owned by the Board of Governors of St. Dunstan's, to the east by Mount Edward Road. Here, St. Dunstan's is here. And to the south by additional CDA zone land, which is to the south, and then to the west by the Confederation Trail, which you'll see in green. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the developer's consultant, Rob LeBlanc, who is here from Fathom, and he will present the details of the project.
All right, thanks, Laurel. Members of council, it's good to be back in person together. I'm going to walk through very high level the concept plan, but I thought before I started and got into kind of a formal agenda, the developers are in the room this evening, so I thought maybe I would invite them up to say a couple of words about what they do and tell you a little bit about themselves.
Good evening, members of council, residents. My name is Ryan Pino, and I'm one of the proponents of this development plan. RYCH Investments is RY Ryan and CH Chris, so it's just the two of us. Just a little context. I'm a resident of Charlottetown, live at 71 Mount Edward Road, so this development is kind of in my home, and special to us as we watch the city grow over time. I live at 71 Mount Edward with my wife Becky and our 7-year-old, almost 7-year-old, going on 7-year-old daughter Victoria. The property at 257 came to be on a snowy Saturday morning back in 2013 during tax season, when I was driving my wife down to her job at Little Wonders Daycare, a little farther down Mount Edward Road. And up out of the corner of a snowbank, I saw the little corner of a for sale sign that had gotten knocked over and snowed in. So I dropped her off and diligently went back to the office to do more tax returns. But I stopped and trudged through the snow, and I pulled this sign out, and John Ives had the listing, and I called him. I said, John, what's the deal with this place? He said, oh, it's a great little house, estate sale, and there's 4 acres there. I said, oh, 4 acres. So we went and looked at that property in the afternoon and put in an offer because we knew it was a special area that was probably going to see some growth in the future as the city expands. And from that original parcel back in 2013, we continued to buy up the neighboring properties over time to eventually kind of amass what you see here tonight, which is about an 11-acre parcel that we have 4 rentals on now. And we want to develop that to try and provide some housing in a time when the population surge has come upon us and people are looking for houses. And when we have a vacancy now on one of those 4 houses and you post it online, you get probably 200 plus responses looking to get into these houses. So the need is there, and we would like to try and serve that need. So I appreciate the support. I know a lot of you have come out that we met. We held our own community council or community meeting back in January. We went door to door out to about 150 meters in the neighborhood to discuss the plan with neighbors and show them our vision. And a lot of those neighbors are here tonight. They want to be able to retire or downsize in that same neighborhood. So I appreciate everybody coming out and welcome your comments.
That's good. All right. Thanks, guys. I'm going to walk you through just a little bit of context on the project. We'll talk about what you all know about it in Charlottetown here, the imperative for new housing. I'll give you a brief overview of the zoning and the request, and then spend a little bit of time on the plan itself. Just as a bit of background, I'm the director of planning for Fathom Studio. We were originally called Acoustics Planning and Design up until 2019 when we rebranded, but we've authored the waterfront plan, the Heritage District plan, a whole range of plans in the city. So I feel like we've got a very good pulse on the planning in the city, and we're a studio of about 45 people. We have over half of our firm is architects, and we're doing a lot of this one just won an urban design award last week in Halifax, but we also have landscape architects and a small engineering division. So the subject property sits really at the boundary of Sherwood and West Royalty, very strategically located. When you look at kind of a plan of the downtown and of the city itself, you'll notice this undeveloped finger of land that runs kind of north-south through the very center of the city. And the rings that you see, these yellow rings, the first one is a 1 kilometer radius. The second one is a 2 kilometer radius. That within that kind of 2 kilometer, which is a nice easy walk, there's 4 schools. We've got UPEI as well. Of course, the major shopping district and big box center, fairly close to all the amenities. And so when cities are looking for places to develop and looking for density to solve some of the housing crisis that we're currently in, these are kind of the ideal spots. They're close, they're walkable. We've got the AT connection of the Confederation Trail right there. There's opportunities for transit expansion, shopping and employment, and of course, close to the airport and very close to the highway that rings in and around Charlottetown on the north side. So it's got everything that you would need to look for new development. I've got Mark here from CBCL. Not sure whether you want to say a few words, but Mark was commissioned to prepare an overall traffic impact study for not only this piece of land, but this whole kind of regional area, and was responsible for looking at the future growth over the next 20 to 30 years of build out. And of course, he was commissioned because the city sees the opportunity for this area as a strategic growth node. So Mark, I don't know whether you want to say anything, or is that good enough? All right, well, we've got Mark here. He can't hide anywhere. We can ask traffic questions at the end of the presentation. So I'm sure we're all aware of the housing imperative. PEI continues to be the fastest growing province in Canada, 4.3% in 2022. It's adding more than 7,000 residents in that year, bringing the total population to 173,000 as of January 1st. And this at a time when Canada itself is experiencing record growth. And so all of the provinces in Canada and many of the major cities are having to grapple with this issue of growth and how we house people, and at the same time, how we look at providing better affordability for new residents and for aging seniors that want to age in place. So in Charlottetown, of course, we're seeing record growth from 36,000 residents in 2016 up to 40,000 people anticipated by the end of 2023. So the city population is growing by roughly 650 or 700 people per year. And that translates into somewhere around 300 new units per year that need to be built. And that's been going on over the last 7 years. So what's also interesting in the city here is that the capital region is also getting younger. While many cities and provinces are getting older, we're seeing that median age in the city of Charlottetown dropping from 41 and a half to down to 40 years of age, which means that we're looking for greater variability in housing as well as affordability. So as Laurel mentioned, the greater portion of this land, about over 90% of it is already zoned as CDA. There's a small portion of land that abuts Mount Edward Road that's currently zoned as 2RS. And we're proposing to take that 2RS and just create a comprehensive a CDA zone. So it's one big master plan development. And so the as of right zoning in that R2S zone allows single family homes and duplexes and semis. The developers and the planning team that's working on that recognize the kind of lower density characteristics of Mount Edward Road. And so the plan that I'm going to show you tonight will take it from what's a semi to a stacked townhouse configuration. So there's no plans for multi-unit buildings directly on the street. And just when you look at the land use bylaw, council and the planning board have to look at this policy number 44.2.4, which looks at developing proposed buildings, creating an acceptable site plan, how we deal with open space and parks, and walkability, and then conservation of features, how the land can be serviced, and of course the traffic impacts that might accrue from this development. The plan itself, and I'll walk you through a fairly high level. I think the overall plan is that in the future there will be a connector road that will run, because the land is so deep between the Confederation Trail and the Mount Edward Road. It's far too deep. If these parcels were all developed without a master plan, you might expect a whole series of cul-de-sacs into the place. And as planners, when we're trying to create walkable neighborhoods, we're trying to stay away from creating dead-end cul-de-sacs. So it's important that this plan looks at a future road connection, which will extend both to the north and to the south in the future. And of course, that means having to phase the plan. So the first phase of the development would be to create these stacked townhomes. And we've made sure that in the site plan that we've moved all of the parking for those stacked townhomes into the rear. We've pulled the units directly up to the street with the hopes that there'll be verandas and you'll be able to talk to your neighbor who's walking by on the sidewalk, and just create a better street ambiance for Mount Edward Road. And what we're also showing in this plan is kind of a temporary connection to two multi-unit buildings, multi-D and multi-C. And those would be built through this connector road, which would be shut off at the point that this new road gets built and connected. Multis A and multi-B can't be built until the new road is actually connected. And so at the point that these buildings are built and this new road is built, we would sever the connection to the stacked townhomes so that we don't have shortcutting for these multi-units directly out onto Mount Edward Road. You'll also notice in the plan that the parkland dedication is 10% when land is subdivided in the city. The developers are proposing a 16% parkland dedication, and we've worked with park staff here in the city to secure a corridor that's roughly 50 feet wide of frontage onto that new road, and then a large park space directly onto the Confederation Trail. And that would have trail connections out to this new road. And you'll also notice in the plan that in between the multi-unit buildings, there's a proposal for private open space. So there would be well-developed courtyards through the space that would connect Mount Edward Road directly to the Confederation Trail. So each of these multi-units would also have a ground floor walkout, so they'd be like townhomes at the base. And we have to contend with about 20 feet of grade change from Mount Edward Road down to one side. So the plan is that the average height of these buildings will be 6 stories. But on the low side, we'll have about a half story, maybe 3/4 of a story that will be exposed. And the idea would not be to have that as an exposed parking garage. It would be some active use. So multi-units C and D from the street would appear like they're 7 stories high, but we'd go up a steep slope and then it would level out to a flat pad. So those buildings would be 6 stories. Similar for multi-units A and B, we've got about a 10-foot grade change across that site. And so we'd have our entrances into the underground parking garage. So one of the other features of this plan is trying to move as much parking as we can to below the buildings. And these multi-unit buildings, generally speaking, if you're looking at a 1-to-1 parking ratio, 1 parking space per unit, that supports about 3 stories of height. So we need a little bit of additional parking on the outside of the buildings. We're showing a fair amount of parking. I would expect that we'd be able to cut back that once we get into the development. But we've also left room for snow storage, being able to make sure that we've got areas to maintain snow. And we've looked at the stormwater management. Of course, there'd be a no net runoff approach here to make sure that the amount of runoff that's currently on this site now does not change after this development happens. And to that end, we're looking at a low point down in the corner that could be a stormwater management pond, though most of the stormwater would be managed directly on the site itself through a whole number of means. That stormwater pond would be a park-like feature. So this is not a engineered, rock-lined, gated stormwater pond. It's a park feature. So when you look at the pro forma, that gives you kind of the build out. Here you'll see that we're proposing 26 stacked townhouse units. So there'd be 13 on the ground level, 13 above, for a total of 26 townhomes. We're proposing these 6-story multi-unit buildings. We've got about 464 total units on it. And again, that satisfies about 1.5 years of the current market demand. And so this isn't something that would be built out in 1 year or 2. Each building would probably take about 2 years to build. I would expect that this project would be somewhere in the 8 to 12 years to do full build out. Each building would be built one after the other over that 2-year period. So as Laurel mentioned, there's 11 acres here. So when we look at the stats for this site, we've got a 1.8 acres of parkland. That's about 16%. When we look at the number of people here, we translate using a 2.2 conversion for units to people. It's fairly standard. That's about 1,000 people that you would expect in this area. Population density of about 42 units per acre. So that's kind of a mid-range population density. And again, when you're looking at where to put the denser developments, areas around shopping centers, areas that can be serviced by transit, areas that have good access to walking trails, active transportation, these are really great areas to support density. And so just to give you a sense, we've got some massing models that show the building articulation. Our architecture firm wasn't commissioned to develop the architecture for this, but the developers did hire an artist to prepare some general concepts of what the buildings could look like. We would propose, though, that the DA would have form-based guidelines to make sure that the architectural integrity of those buildings are built with step backs and setbacks and all of the things that make and building articulation that make buildings in urban neighborhoods like this very good for the surrounding context. So this just gives you a sense, looking from Mount Edward, this top view, you can see kind of a 2.5, 3-story stacked townhouse development with the multi-unit buildings set back from the street. You see the step backs at the 4th story. So that means that, you know, as you see it, the mass of the upper stories isn't as pronounced. And we looked at a number of precedents that as we, you know, once this gets approved and we move forward into more detailed architectural design, we'd be looking, here's some examples of stacked townhomes, some with brick facades, some of them with wood facades, but it's this nature of kind of stacking where the ground floor unit takes that entire ground floor, and then the upper story units are able to have 1 or 1.5 stories above it. The developers also commissioned an artist to prepare kind of a concept sketch of the buildings, which would be kind of articulated in a lot more detail as a development permit progresses. But it just shows the scale of those buildings, the walkout nature of the units into this private open space, how we need to handle the grade transitions. It probably wouldn't be one giant set of stairs, but a series of stairs creating public spaces. And what's just off the right-hand side of the page there is the parking garage entrance in and under this development. And again, one of the things that we would hope to achieve in later phases of the development is the opportunity for ground floor retail type uses. So the idea that there could be a coffee shop here or a barber or any of those kind of local community uses that benefit from not having to get into a car, but just being able to walk down. 1,000 new residents can support a number of businesses directly on the site here.
Thank you.
So just to kind of wind up process to date, the developers have done some door-to-door brochures. Back in January, they held a public meeting, January 13th. And of course, we've got the PIM tonight, and we look forward to further feedback from the community and from council.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much. Thank you, Laurel. Ryan, your partner is Chris.
Bagwell. Yep.
Okay. I also forgot to introduce our CAO, Eleanor Mohammed, who is also a professional planner, and she's here with us tonight. And I'd like to acknowledge that we have our Minister of Communities, Land Use, and Housing, Minister Rob Lance. So great to see you here. Okay, before we open the floor to comments, so it'll be both Laurel and Rob, I believe, and possibly Ryan or answering to the questions. Just a reminder that we try to get as many speakers to the mic as possible. There is a timer there. We have a max of 5 minutes. And as the deputy mayor stated, as the chair of the Standing Committee for Planning, Development, and Heritage, please give your name. You don't want to give your address. You can just give the municipality that you're living in. So we'll open the mic. And it's now open for the public to provide comments, feedback, and we're here to listen.
Good evening, Andrea Battison, Charlottetown. I'll get things rolling. Hopefully it'll encourage other people to get up and share some of their thoughts. So first of all, thanks everybody for taking the time to put this together, for the developers and the property owners for that presentation. First of all, one of the things I was happy to see about that was that you weren't crossing the Confederation Trail. We've had some developments in that area that are breaching that trail, and I think that trail is very important for community and connection and the city. And when developers are more respectful of that trail and its importance, it's really good to see. So thank you for that. Also really pleased to see that you're incorporating some amenities on the ground floor that hopefully could serve the residents there, especially if you're expecting people to age in place. It's a much shorter, safer walk to, basic groceries, some other needs, and just to animate the streetscape in the area. The a couple of questions I did have about that was, I appreciate that the proposal is there just to show the drawings, I'm sorry, are there just to show the proposal as it is. However, it's showing a lot of empty fields, and that, I guess, as we all know, isn't really quite correct because there are developments that have been approved there, I think on both sides. And so this development is going to not be sitting in a field. It's going to be sitting and integrating and interacting with other developments. And I'm wondering if at some point those kind of diagrams could have been included, just so people get a better impression of the impact. Obviously, there's a large road going through the middle, which suggests it's connecting to something else. And that's part of a traffic proposal, which is not up for debate at this meeting. So I'll not emphasize that. I do notice that that tends to split the development into two halves. And if you're potentially thinking about families and you've got a nice courtyard in the middle and you're looking for play space, it's a potentially a dangerous crossing. If you're trying to create a community that's kind of self-enclosed and can work safely, it would be amazing to see some child-friendly, safe playing areas in that development as well, if it could be integrated. It was good to see that there was a bit more for parkland being proposed rather than the minimum requirement of 10%. I did see about, I think you added it up, about 534 parking spaces. So my question is, do you have a percentage for surface parking area and asphalt? Is that a calculation that you have available?
Rob, if you're going to answer, please just use the mic because we want to get it all recorded, please. Thank
Do
you.
you want to, because I've got a number of questions here that I can respond to. Do you want to?
Yes.
I could just keep going quickly. So
Yeah.
I was curious to see, you're
Yeah.
building a 6-story building and we've got a big demand for housing here. I'm curious how many of those levels that you're building are expensive parkade levels rather than being dedicated to housing. And maybe, you know, parking variances could be introduced. And might we be a possibility to integrate a transit stop
Mhm.
within the complex rather than maybe a stop on the street? And then finally, while you're going through the list, it's just my sort of recurring question for council. Again, everyone's put a lot of effort into preparing the meeting, renting the space. Public has come out here. Some people have managed to read it online. Some people have only been able to come here tonight to see the presentation, hear some of the interaction and the questions, and hopefully some of the answers from the property owners and the developers. We've rented this space. You're recording it so that people can watch it. However, we're still looking at a 12 noon deadline tomorrow for creating comments. And I really think you're going to get the most money out of your investment, or the best return on this huge investment, to get public input on a massive project. And if the city could consider extending the deadline for comments so that people who couldn't be here tonight can actually have time to look at the video, maybe reach out to the developer, ask some questions, get some answers. I understand it's a scheduling thing. You need these things for the minutes for this planning board meeting to get to this council meeting. Would it be so traumatic and difficult to let it roll over to next month's planning meeting so you can get a lot of thoughtful input from residents? Council can think about it, planning board can think about the questions, there can be some back and forth. And you know what? It shows up and it's part of next month's planning board package, and then it goes to next month's council meeting. And that's my comment, and I'll sit down and thank you for your time.
So Andrea,
Mhm.
great comments, questions. I'll get Rob to answer your questions, but as for the extension, I think we discussed this at a previous public consultation. If Laurel can answer that about extending it, we'll wait for his answers for your first.
Asking, yep. Other communities, other municipalities in this province allow more than overnight for their residents to respond.
So Rob, do you want to answer the first?
Yes, that's great. Andrea, thanks for those questions. It is Andrea, right? Okay. Yeah, the quality of public questions in PEI are always great. So you talked about supporting mixed use. I'm glad to hear that. I think there's certainly enough population here to warrant that type. The placemaking and neighborhood building, you mentioned about the road kind of bisecting the buildings. I'm glad you brought that up. What we're proposing here is on-street parking, likely on both sides of the road. You'll also notice the plan has sidewalks on both sides of the road. So there'd be urban street trees as part of the urban forest program. We would have either light standards or we're not sure yet whether it's electrical poles with Cobra heads or whether light standards will be part of it, but we work with the city to determine what the standard of that road is. But having parking on both sides of the street helps to make safer streets. It slows vehicles down, and we may even have, you see, two excuse me, crosswalks that are proposed in this area. The child-friendly spaces, we'll be working with the Parks Department to determine the content of the park. And about half the parking spaces are underground. So all the buildings under the entire footprint of the building are parking garages. So that supports a parking ratio of about 1.2. And so out of those 534, there's roughly 250 parking spaces or 2.5 acres of parking. So that gives you, that will have to deal with the stormwater runoff as part of the plan. I hope that answers all the questions. God bless you. Look at you.
Laurel, did you want to address the time frame, please?
Hi, so in regards to the comments about time for comment, the bylaw requires, I believe it's actually 7 days for a rezoning, which would be the same as the CDA amendment. And that's because of the requirements in the Planning Act, that's the province's legislation. So we do allow for more than 7 days. We allow for 14 days. So the city does have the opportunity to, they can allow more time if they wish. At one time, we only allowed comments up until the day of the public meeting, and there wasn't an opportunity to comment afterwards. And we did change that. I think it was probably maybe 3 years ago prior to COVID. So that definitely is a good point, Andrea, and I do agree with you. It would, if we did allow more time for comment, it would allow staff more time also to assess the comments from the public. But that's something that we would have to look at and discuss, and it would require a bylaw amendment. But I think that's something that we definitely could take into consideration and also consult with council on that.
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks, Laurel, for that information. I'm just curious, what part of the bylaw says that the comments have to be in by noon tomorrow? Because if you're following the Planning Act, other municipalities have a longer time frame for commenting. So I'm just curious where that is. I've never seen comments by the next day.
So the Planning Act requires for rezoning 7 days notice, and it has to appear in the paper twice. Other municipalities that allow more time, that's the municipalities have the opportunity to go more stringent than the province. So they set their own bylaws. Our bylaw for rezoning says 7 days clear notice, so it follows the Planning Act. We go to 14 days. So we have allowed more time, but I do agree that it would be nice to allow more time for comments after the public meeting, but we're going to have to, as staff and council, sit down and discuss that.
Okay. Okay, no, I guess my specific question is what part of the bylaw, the zoning and development bylaw, says that that the comments have to be in by noon after this meeting? If you could have the meeting a couple days before, if tomorrow is your deadline based on your calculations.
The bylaw doesn't say that it has to be in by noon the next day. There is no place in the bylaw that says that. It says that it has to have 7 days, so it's from the time you post it to the time after. So we have to give notice of the public meeting, which is required under the Planning Act. And then you have 7 days. You can't count the day of the notice, and you can't count the last day. And then we've extended that to 14 days from the time of mail out to the time of the public meeting date. So we are more, we do allow more time than what the Planning Act or the bylaw states, but as you said, there may be opportunity for more comment.
We
And,
could have had this meeting on Friday.
No, we couldn't have the meeting on Friday
Well, I won't get.
because we have to have so
Yeah.
many days prior to the meeting for notice.
Andrea,
Yeah, okay.
I know in the past, at a previous public consultation, we did allow for comments to come in and they were just notified as late comments, but were forwarded to the planning board. So that could happen in this situation. Okay? Floor is open.
I'm a bit shorter than Andrea, I think. My name is Barbara Dilla. I live in Charlottetown. Thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity to comment on this and ask questions. I guess having heard what Andrea said, I can only agree with a lot of what she said. I also had a question about the deadline because a lot of what is said tonight we wouldn't have known. And so there are things that I would have liked to have reviewed from the recording and also looked into a bit more in order to be able to have made a more thorough comment or provide feedback or ask questions. So that will be a little bit difficult with the time frame for tomorrow because of other commitments that I have. Nevertheless, having said that, I prepared a little something. It's a little bit of a very, very, very brief overview about minimum parking requirements. So I'll more or less read what I have, but it just really, really skims anything to do with the minimum parking requirements. So minimum parking requirements were created decades ago, and they basically no longer serve the purpose that they once did. And they've now created numerous problems. For example, and perhaps Rob from Fathom, I don't know if you have any costs on minimum parking, but my research indicates that a surface parking space costs in the range of $8,000 to $15,000 per space, and an underground parking spot could cost up to $80,000 to build. And these are costs that are passed down to owners or tenants, residents, but they are passed down in one way or another. Amending or reforming or removing minimum parking requirements would mean that developers and home builders could decide how much and what kind of parking makes sense for their development. It has been proven that removing parking requirements improves housing affordability and attainability, which is affordability was one of the aspects that Rob had mentioned. Removing minimum parking requirements also enables spaces to be designed for people rather than for vehicles. And it also creates a more compact urban form that encourages walking, cycling, and transit. It also makes better use of the land that results in less asphalt and more green space, which is of course better for the environment. Greater investments would be needed for better bus service, of course, and bicycle lanes and bicycle parking to lessen car dependency and to give people more choices in how to get around. In other words, more viable alternatives. We are in a climate crisis, and we all know that transportation non-PEI contributes the most to greenhouse gas emissions, and that the #1 priority in the province's 2040 net zero framework is the reduction of islanders' reliance on passenger vehicles. It states, reducing the overall reliance on passenger vehicles can be done through the availability of more and different types of transportation options that are affordable, dependable, and sustainable. I also happened to look at the What We Heard report from the draft official plan, and it says another issue that came up as a barrier to the creation of new housing was parking minimums. We heard from multiple residents across engagement methods about the need for an overhaul of parking requirements to eliminate red tape and promote density. Many feel the current regulations are too restrictive, and a relaxing of parking requirements would encourage development. Finally, a recent Fusion Charlottetown is a nonprofit or community group that caters, responds to, brings together people from the 18 to 40-year-old range, but is open to all ages. They had a Twitter poll recently that asked the question, should Charlottetown continue having minimum parking requirements for new housing builds? 82% answered no, and that's 122 votes. 14% answered yes, and 3.3 selected what are minimum parking requirements. Over 1,400 North American cities, including 9 Canadian ones, have removed minimum parking requirements in part or citywide. Is it not time for the City of Charlottetown to unbundle parking from housing? So my questions, well, that's one question to council. My question to Rob and perhaps to Ryan is, would you appreciate being able to work with unrestricted parking requirements, i.e. not having to work with parking requirements?
Barbara, just before Rob answers, as you know, we are doing a comprehensive review of our official plan. And O2 is one of the consulting firms that is proposing that we remove minimum parking requirements. So that's part of the official plan development. So I think that could be added or provide comment from Rob, but I think we're going down that road, but that is another process. So Rob, did you want to?
Yeah, I did. Margaret, you must be a fellow.
Barbara.
Okay, sorry.
It's okay.
A fellow Shupista. So
Yes,
Donald
I was gonna quote him.
Yeah, my all-time favorite planner. So the high cost of free parking.
Yes.
His 3 rules are, advocate the removal of parking standards. Number 1, make sure the money goes back, the revenue, into downtown organizations so that downtowns benefit.
Or public transit.
And then the other is to right price parking. So I absolutely am on that same wavelength. I've chatted with the developers about car share programs. Halifax has a really great new private car share. If there was an opportunity for doing car share in this and reducing. So any way to reduce or eliminate parking requirements, I think would be a great opportunity. Ultimately, it's the developers that are quite often their own worst enemy with requiring more parking than perhaps is needed. But, looking out 10 years into the future, 20 years, we know that we're not all going to own cars. And so we need to start planning for that now. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. And Mayor Brown, I just wanted to mention that I did read the draft official plan, and I know that they're revising or going through it. So in that draft official plan, it simply said to explore the possibility of amending or eliminating part of the minimum parking requirements. What I would like to know is if in the meantime, not only for this kind of development, but any other kind of home builders or anyone wanting to do something, perhaps even on a smaller scale that won't be a massive project that will take 5, 10, 15, 20 years, would be, as many other North American city councils have done recently, is amend the current zoning and development bylaw by removing minimum parking requirements for new developments, because that you could do anytime and you could do that now. And that would send a really strong signal to other municipalities and also to small scale developers, home builders, that they can now look at seriously.
As Rob said, that this is a 10, 12, I believe 10-year Yeah, so hopefully it won't take us 10 years to overhaul the official plan and to do the requirements amendments to the zoning development bylaw. That is in our crosshairs of doing something for this parking requirement. So I think that's another meeting. We have a number of residents here, and I just want to make sure that they get an opportunity to get to the mic, but we will keep that as part of our process going forward. And I'm glad that our CAO is here, that she will definitely put that on the table.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Charles Kelleher. I'm a resident of Charlottetown. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this evening. Congratulations to the developer on a well laid out plan. It's very impressive. I have a question for you, sir, if you don't mind. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. So I thought I heard you say when the road that we see in the middle here is put in, the temporary access road would be closed. So that being the case, once that's done, where's the secondary access?
So the plan is that this road connection is the key to building multi-unit A, multi-unit B, and probably the park space. So nothing can really happen until that road connection. And of course, it can't end here and end here. It would have to extend either through and connect to an existing road to the north. And we're also aware that other developers are working on this plans for the southern lands. I don't know whether they've come forward yet, but the plan is to extend that collector road all the way down to the south.
So I think you're telling me there is no secondary access.
So, so it means that we could develop these ones. Once this road goes in and it's actually connected, that unlocks these ones and it forces the closure of the connection to Mount Edward Road through here. So these three connecting points that you see would be shut down. You can see it better in the plan dashed.
Right?
Yep.
So if there's a catastrophe, the road to the south is, I presume, the Spencer Drive extension?
Mark, do you want to touch on traffic? It's probably a good time to have the traffic engineer come in. Let's get this party started.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, thanks, Rob. Rob introduced me briefly at the start of the meeting. Mark McDonald from CBCL Limited here in Charlottetown, and we were consulted by the city a couple of years ago to work on to prepare a kind of an area-wide traffic study for this part of the city, and it included this development. So yes, the north-south road kind of through the proposed development would connect to an extension of Spencer Drive, correct?
And where would be the secondary?
To the north?
Well, for the entire development, I understand the new fire regulations require that if there are more than 100 homes, there has to be two entrances. So where in this plan is the secondary?
So to the north, it will connect to, the plan is for it to connect to St. Martha's Court.
But that's not part of
Which,
the, how does it get to St. Martha's Court?
it connects to Mount Edward Road. So Spencer and St. Martha's both connect to Mount Edward Road, which would provide access to this development.
Except the developer doesn't own the land. So my concern is more for the city council. You're looking at approving a plan that doesn't have a plan for a secondary access. That'd be my comment.
So the land's owned by St. Dunstan's, and I believe you are one of the board members. Those lands, as we have discussed, there is a portion of property that will have to be dedicated to road for connectors. So all the developers that are along this north-south connector will have to provide land for this road. So Fathom or CBCL, the developers for this project, what is the name of the developer, RNC? Okay, you just think of Ryan Pino. So, and then we also have Flourish that are also to the south. And then APM also provided land for a road connector that goes east-west. So all of those, when those pieces of property come together, all those road parcels will connect. And then you will have the connector to, through St. Martha's Court to Mount Edward Road, and then further north and south, and then down to Spencer Drive. So if that makes sense.
Well, thank you. It makes sense, provided St. Dunstan's gives someone the land, or does the city intend to expropriate it?
Well, that'll be an answer for city council, but I don't think
okay.
that's something to be discussed here in a public meeting.
Then
But I
at the
think
end-
it's been discussed.
Then at the end of the day, this whole development is predicated on its secondary access road going through a piece of land owned by someone else. Am I correct?
Well, there also is a secondary access off Spencer Drive.
Well, I asked the gentleman, do we see it?
Yeah, I mean, when you have, there's a range of parcels that run all the way through here. The beauty of having a CDA type zone is it has to go through a process like this, and that requires us as developers and as planners to work with the city. We know that we're not going to get any development unless we have a road connection through our property. And every developer would expect you need fire access, you need frontage. So you have to have a road, and when the lots are this deep, every developer that comes to the city as part of the CDA is going to have to connect. We're just the first one through it. So they're going to have to connect to this road on both sides in order to secure their development rights for the future. And you can do that without taking people's land. So, yeah.
Well, thanks very much, but I still haven't heard where the secondary access is unless you go through someone else's land.
Andrea Battison, if I could have a quick follow-up,
Yeah, this will be your second time, just for 2 minutes. I just want to make sure that the residents from the area, please use the mic if you wish to.
I looked.
Go ahead.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
To ask a question? Thank you. Right. It's a stage development. So for units A and B plus the townhouses, I'm just wanted to double check, is that 10% green space for that when you just look at the top half? Because it's very bottom heavy towards the trail.
So the 16% parkland is of the entire 11-acre parcel.
Yes, I appreciate that, but you're
Yep.
saying it's a stage development. So if
Oh,
you're doing A and B,
I'm
does it
I'm
have
sure
to have 10%?
the city would probably want that moved over to the city upon signing of a development agreement. So I assume that comes at the early phase of the project, even though the road's not built.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying for the townhouse units, which are going up first.
Yep.
Plus the big blocks A and B,
Yeah, C and D, yes,
or C and D, I am
Yep.
sorry.
Yep.
I
that's all
read
right.
it backwards. So the ones closest to Mount Edward Road.
Yep.
When the townhouses go in and those two main buildings go in, and you are saying it's possibly a 10-year stage plan, does that first section closest to Mount Edward Road have 10% green space? There's an awful lot of surface parking there.
The 10% green space would be, as soon as this is secured, it would be signed over to the city. I'm not sure what I'm missing. It's 16%
Yeah,
of the entire
So
land.
Brian Pino's development is in staged, so he would have to sign a development agreement. Correct me if I'm wrong,
right.
Laurel, whether it's 10% or 16%, but I believe Ryan Pino and his partner, Chris Baglow, is saying, we want to provide 16% instead of 10%.
I understand that. I'm just saying when you've got the portion of the development on the right, does that meet the 10% green space if it's only going up in sections?
Oh,
of
I see what
stairs?
you mean. No,
No, it doesn't
no.
look like it does. So my next question is, are you expecting to have to ask for any major variances for this as concept as proposed?
Because it's a DA where it's not an as-of-right development, there's no requests for variances.
Excellent. Okay. So if there's no request for major variances, have you considered approaching council to ask for a major variance on the parking requirements?
We would love to have that.
Why don't you, I suggest that you perhaps be one of the first developers in this city to, instead of asking for extra height, decreased setbacks, lack of step back,
Yes.
decrease rear yard setbacks,
Yes.
because you have to fit in all of this parking. It's a lot of surface parking. Why don't you propose, as others in other cities, to get a variance on the parking?
We would like to formally request a 0.7
Yeah.
parking ratio.
So- So first, as you know, Andrew, you know the process. First, this has to be approved.
I'm just,
That's why
just giving them an idea.
I know, and it's a great idea.
Okay, and just as, we've got a scale diagram here. Could you show me how much room a transit stop, maybe two, would take in that space?
How much room?
Yep,
Yeah, most of the transit buses are around 50 feet, so you normally have a 56-foot kind of lay-by. So each of those parking spaces that you see on the plan, I don't know whether they show up very well, those are 24-foot spaces. So one of those two spaces would be converted into a bus stop if we could get T3 through here.
so we could go grandiose and maybe use two and put a nice shelter in
There
there.
could be one on both sides of the street. Yep.
And you could then have a great play space for kids.
Yes.
And you
Thank
could perhaps build more residential units because you'd save money on the underground parking.
Andrea, I think we got, I think this, yeah, but no, it's 4 minutes times 2. But again, all good points. And I think Rob LeBlanc is very keen on making this work with minimum parking requirements. Make sure that we get T3 going in there to pick up passengers with their bicycles, walkable streets. Very good. Thank you. Mic's open. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, 480, 482. Am I ready to go there? So Paul Brown, are you, sorry, is Laurel introducing it first? Thank you, Laurel.
So this is a request, for a rezoning, to rezone the subject property from R2 low-density residential to R3T medium-density residential townhouse. It also requires an amendment to the future land use map, Appendix A, from low-density residential to medium-density residential. And the proposal is for additional density on existing lot in a mature neighborhood. So the property is located in a mature neighborhood along Queen Street. It's bounded to the north by R2 low-density residential zone properties and R3 medium-density residential zone properties. So here and here. To the east by R2S, low-density residential zone properties, and further east, MUC, mixed-use corridor zone properties along University Avenue. So here and then further east would be University Avenue. To the south by Newland Crescent with R2 and R3 zone properties, right here. And to the west with R2 low-density residential zone properties along both sides of Queen Street. So here. The property is currently zoned R2 low-density residential. It's occupied by a semi-detached dwelling. The applicant is requesting to construct, in addition to the existing 2-unit dwelling, to convert it to a 4-unit townhouse. It's a corner lot, approximately 9,147.6 square feet, or 0.21 of an acre in size. And the bylaw requires 1,500 square meters approximately per townhouse on a corner lot. Under the R3T zone, the property can support the proposed 4 units. 4 parking spaces are required for this building. There are already 2 existing spaces located off Newland Crescent. And 2 ones will be constructed off the back of the lot with access off Queen Street. If an addition is constructed, each townhouse unit is required to have its own separate services for water, sewer, and electrical, and a party wall agreement is required to address items such as easements for parking, maintenance, and services. This is a look at the building. Each unit on the property is required to be subdivided individually so that each unit meets the frontage requirements set out in the bylaw. And the property's frontage is currently 75 feet and it's located along Newland Crescent. If left as one property, the property does not have adequate frontage along Newland Crescent to meet the bylaw requirement of 80 feet for a 4-unit townhouse. Therefore, each unit must be subdivided individually off Queen Street. So, because this is the narrowest portion of the lot currently, that is considered the frontage. However, when the addition is put on, the property would be subdivided through these 2 units and through these 2 units. So each unit would have their own frontage and lot area. So the neighborhood tends to be low density, 1 to 2 units with 3 unit dwellings and apartment buildings, which are R3 medium density, and those are sprinkled throughout the neighborhood. Abutting properties consist of low-density single and 2-unit dwellings on the north and east side, and the property is it's within close walking distance to shopping, elementary schools, and parkland. If rezoned, the current density will increase on the property by double, and therefore a landscape buffer would be required to be retained along the property boundary of any proposed development that's currently existing low density. So the developer, Paul Brown, is here. If you have any questions for him, I can invite him up to the podium. And if there's any questions that I can answer in relation to the bylaw, I'm happy to do so. Thanks.
Paul, do you wish to come up to say a few words, or do you?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Brown, and I'm a resident of Charlottetown. I'm representing Kenny Martin here, who's actually the owner of this property. The existing building that is there now is a semi-detached, which Mr. Martin had done major renovations to a couple of years ago, and we have all this extra property sitting beside it that's not being utilized. And if you see the type of quality and work that the Martin brothers do when they renovate properties and stuff like that, they do a very excellent job. And you know, we feel that you know, the demand is there for housing. And also it's location. It's in an excellent spot for seniors or for young families with the schools and the grocery stores and so on and so forth just around the corners. We're very excited to proceed with this project and open to any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. So the mic is open. Just introduce yourself, name, municipality.
My name is Stuart McDonald, and I live next door to the proposed building. I'm just wondering, the existing building, are you proposing to build to the left of it on the property?
If you're
Like if you're on Queen Street,
you're on Queen Street looking directly at the building,
Yes.
yes, it is to the left of it, yes.
to your, it looks like your building, not quite as big.
No,
of
the
the-
building is not as long,
Yeah,
because of the footprint where we have our setbacks.
yes.
So we had to shorten it up.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. That was just my general question, if you're proposing to build to the left or you're building a new and Crescent. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, Andrea Battison, Charlottetown. It's just a question about trying to understand the rationale behind frontages, minimum frontages. You're saying that this is now a quadruplex and it doesn't have enough frontage. So I'm wondering if you could explain the rationale for minimum frontage and how this does or how that still meets that or doesn't meet that, because I'm not sure that that's clear. And I'm curious, are there any other buildings in the city where you can, I guess, subdivide the property through the house?
Yes, that's a common thing. So most semi-detached or townhouses are all subdivided and they have individual ownership. Because this is a larger lot and they're adding an additional 2 units, you're required to have so much frontage per unit. So instead of leaving this under one ownership, the owner is proposing to subdivide each unit and sell them individually or rent them individually. So each unit would have its own ownership. So when that happens, there's an agreement that's drawn up under the bylaw. It's required by the bylaw. It's called a party wall agreement. And that's a legal agreement that's registered on title and registered at the registry office here in Charlottetown. And that will stipulate ownership issues and easement issues with each property. So each property, each unit shares a common roof that's covered under the agreement, driveway access, utilities, services, all that is covered under the party wall agreement. And that's not just something that's unique to this particular development. That's a common legal tool that's used for subdividing attached dwellings.
Question, CAO, Governor? Okay. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Laura Palmer Thompson. Introduction of new business. Did you have some there, Councilman Kate? No? No? Okay, no. Motion to adjourn? Yes, sir. Moved by Councilor Ramsey, second by Councilor McKay. All those in favor? Okay. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.